Namgay Zam. I'm going to be reading you a story called Samphel's Pride and Woes from the Talisman of Good Fortune and Other Stories from Rural Bhutan by Rinzin Rinzin. Samphel's Pride and Woes. Uncle Topke was my mother's only brother, a 32-year-old bachelor who had sworn never to get married. He dedicated his life in supporting his aged mother, widowed elder sister, and his only nephew. The village folks called him Ashang uncle because of his relationship with me, and trader or businessman because of his profession. But since even my mother addressed him as uncle, I always thought that my uncle was my mother's uncle too, until I was 8. He would make at least 3 trips each year to Gudama, an Indian town on the Indo-Bhutanese border in the south. There, he would barter hand-woven garments, beeswax, walnuts, and pigtail hair with cotton, wool, and silk yarns, salt, kerosene, cloth, dry fish, rubber shoes, sandals, tea, sugar, and a score of various other goods that his experiences over the years told him were in high demand back home. He would pack them all up, firm and good, load them up on the backs of half a dozen ponies, and start the long journey home. Uncle Topke's every departure to Gudama would always be followed by my consistent daily inquiry of my mother about his return. Since I knew how to count to 20 only, my mother would initially tell me that he would be back after 20 days. Then, after she had told me the same thing for 20 days, the real countdown would begin, and I would be the happiest boy in the whole village. I would go around and show off my uncle's return to every single child in the village, and every kid in the village would willingly share their peaches, pears, dried beef, beaten maize, and dry fried rice their mothers had put in their small pouches when they came out to play with other kids. Of course, there were always some kids who wouldn't want to share their riches with me, but I would always know how to lure them into parting with a portion of what they had. All I had to utter was, "Uncle Topke will be back tomorrow, and he will be bringing me candies and balloons," and the spell never failed. At least 2 days before Uncle's arrival, my mother would distill some wine and store it in my late grandfather's favorite short, cylindrical wooden container with silver linings and gold carvings. She would even polish the wine container with a piece of clean white cotton rug. "This is how your uncle likes his wine container," she would say, with a sense of satisfaction after she had removed the last particle of dirt from it. Uncle's first night at home after every trip always started with a ceremonial reception of wine, followed by a sumptuous dinner composed of dried beef and pork with potatoes and red chilies, fried cheese, and a bamboo shoot soup prepared with my mother's 30 years of cooking experience. After dinner, some relatives and friends would drop by with the tall cylindrical bamboo containers full of wine and sit around him like a flock of vultures, eagerly waiting for their leader to finish eating his share from a carcass of a horse. And Uncle would begin to narrate the tales of his latest adventures. I would sit beside him, my neck craned, and stare into his face to pick up every detail of the tale. He would stroke my dust and lice-ridden hair every now and then with his big, calloused hand in synchrony with the tales of his journey. And the tales would go on late into the night and early into the next day until all of the tall bamboo containers were emptied and his own wine container was emptied and refilled half a dozen times by my mother. The house would be filled with ba, zai, and way of surprises and admiration of my uncle's tales from the audience. And I would be reassured that my uncle was truly the village's hero. Eventually, I would be lying in his lap and dozing off. And in my sleep, I would be Uncle Tsongpen myself on a journey to a distant land at the head of a few scores of ponies. Uncle's first day after his arrival would always begin with a cup of wine served by my mother from his favorite wine container. After the wine and a breakfast of millet dough with buttermilk, fresh cow's butter, potato curry, and salted butter tea, Uncle would unpack loads and loads of things. After every single load had been unpacked, the gift distribution, the most awaited session, would begin. I would be the first person to get a gift, followed by mother, grandmother, and other relatives. He would also bring a slab of dried tea leaves, some betel nut, and some dried fish for every household in the village. My mother and I would go from door to door to deliver the gifts. Uncle sends this humble gift with his apologies that he couldn't bring more, my mother would say every time someone opened the door. Oh, he shouldn't have. It's not possible that he brings gifts every time he goes to Gudama. Would you please thank him for me? The recipient would respond as they received the gift. By the time my mother and I had delivered all the gifts, my uncle would have already finished his part of the job. He would have already put aside enough quantities of cotton, wool, and silk yarns for my mother to weave kishutara, salt, sugar, tea, and dry fish for the family to last until his next return trip from Gudama, and plain white cotton cloth for the 12 flagpoles outside our house and the wind horses on the hillocks far north of our village. 1/4 of his remaining goods were put aside to be exchanged for rice, butter, cheese, and meat for the family. That 1/4 he would consider as his net profit from the trip. After all things had been sorted out to his satisfaction, he would tell my very approving mother and grandmother that he would barter the rest with hand-woven garments, walnuts, beeswax, and pigtail hair again. After all, the business must go on, he would say with a chuckle and raised eyebrows, and even the villagers deaf and the dumb could make out from the expression on his face that Ajahn Tsongpa was happy with the prospect of his business. Come the second day after his return, I would always wake up to see my uncle sitting in the middle of many scores of things, and almost all the village folks inside our small house. As usual, my uncle would walk over to my bed and say, "Why, my prince is up," and rescue me from the bed and curl me up in his big masculine arms that felt as soft as the wool on a lamb's skin. Everybody would look at my uncle dressing me up in the new cotton ko. The ko, by the way, is the national dress for Bhutanese men, and the gumboot he had brought for me. "Such love for your nephew, Ajahn Tsongpa," the people around him would exclaim with envy. "Samphel is my prince," Uncle would say with unhidden pride. When I was 5, my uncle enrolled me in the village's Gomde, a local school for lay monks. Soon after, he left home for Gudama again at the head of a half-dozen ponies as usual. The very next day, I started counting the days of his return again. One night, on the second half of 20 days, we had a horse neighing outside our house. "Mindula!" my mother exclaimed in surprise. She lit a pinewood flint in a flash and ran outside. "It is Mindula, Amma! It is Mindula!" she shouted excitedly when she was outside. I ran out of the house calling out, "Ashang! Ashang!" at the top of my voice. "But he's alone," mother gasped. Mindula, Uncle's favorite horse, was surely standing alone. When my mother saw me drowning in disappointment, she held my hand and said, "Ashang must have sent Mindula ahead to inform us of his arrival. Let's go inside and wait." She then led me back into the house. When my mother went out to feed Mindula with unhusked rice and maize, my grandmother put her fragile hand on my head and double assured me that Uncle would be home any moment. Just then, my mother walked in and sat beside grandmother, her face drained of blood. "Mindula is not eating," she said after a long time. And the long wait began. Uncle did not arrive. The next morning, as I was going to Gomde, I saw Mindula still standing outside the house. As I walked by, something deep inside of me told me to stop. And as I stood still, Mindula trotted toward me and nuzzled me gently. Just as I was reaching out to stroke his forehead, he slumped to the ground in slow motion. Nervously, I took a closer look at him, and then I realized how lean and thin he had grown. I bent over him and stroked his forehead with utmost sympathy. He did not move. Mindula was dead. I continued the countdown again. I counted the days over and over again. At the Gomde, I was promoted from learning Kakaganga to Shunlup, then to Tsudi. I advanced to Dorche and to Diksha and finally to Shaju, which means he advanced from the most basic Dzongkha, which is Kakaganga, to an advanced stage of learning. But my uncle still did not return from Gudama. My mother cooked ground maize more often than usual. The menu at breakfast was always the same: maize powder porridge. There was not even a scent of dry fish in the house. The holes in my gumboot either kept getting bigger or they multiplied in numbers until finally I had to part with it and walk barefoot. Of my 2 plain cotton coats, one had returned to Mother Earth, while the other one already had a few multicolored patches on it. My mother and I did not go door to door to deliver uncle's gifts anymore. Instead, we received gifts from other Tsongpas. My trick to lure other village children into sharing their riches with me did not work anymore. My mother grew paler and leaner by the day, and the number of grey hairs on her head kept doubling by the day until her head was as grey as her mother's. My grandmother's gentle sobs changed to pathetic cries. Finally, she started running around naked and eventually jumped from the roof of our house and never moved again. And through all of this, I counted many 20s of days until I could finally count to 100 over and over again. However, my uncle still did not come home. I would still tell my mother and everybody in the village that my uncle would be home any moment. But my uncle did not come home. One day, my teacher at Gomde summoned me to his room. "Samphel, I know how much you want your uncle to come home," he said carefully. "Everyone in the village, including me, also know how much you love your uncle and how much he loved you." Then he wore an uneasy look on his face, took a deep breath, and said, "But I'm sorry to tell you that your uncle will not be coming home anymore. You're old enough now. You must understand that certain things that happen in life cannot be undone once they have already happened. Your uncle disappeared in Gudama 5 years ago. As much as we have tried to find his body, we couldn't. And knowing how much you loved him, no one could tell you the truth until now. Now, you must be brave and accept this fact, but always remember that your uncle is always with you. I know he is. I can see him in you." The end.